today's guest of honor, Mr. Nandkumar Saravade. Drawing from his impactful stints in government and private sector spanning 36 years with expertise across diverse domains of law enforcement, banking, cybersecurity, and technology management, he considers himself a knowledge seeker with action bias. Mr. Saravade was the founding CEO of Reserve Bank Information Technology Private Limited, a fully owned subsidiary of RBI for technology management and cybersecurity. Earlier, he worked as CEO, Data Security Council of India, a think tank specializing in cybersecurity industry development, policy research, and advocacy. During 2013-15, he advised EY and ICICI Bank on fraud risk management. Till September 2013, he worked as Director, Citibank India, heading Security, Investigation and Vigilance. During 2018 to 2011, he worked as General Manager, Financial Crime Prevention Group, ICICI Bank, where he looked after fraud risk assessment and controls reviews, applications training and vendor due diligence, transaction monitoring, investigations and regulatory reporting and compliance. He also served as Director, Cybersecurity and Compliance, NASCOM, which encompassed policy formulation, capacity building, and mass awareness campaigns on cybersecurity. Prior to joining the private sector, Mr. Saravade served in the 1987 batch of Indian Police Service. He was posted in the states of Jammu and Kashmir and West Bengal. He joined the Central Bureau of Investigation on deputation in 1996 and worked in Mumbai and Jaipur for 7 years, looking after enforcement of the Prevention of Corruption Act, investigation of bank frauds and economic offences. Mr. Saravade was awarded the Prime Minister's baton and revolver for being the best all-rounder probationer of the 1987 batch of the IPS, and also the Indian Police Medal for Distinguished Services. Welcome, Mr. Saravade. The mic is yours, sir.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you're audible. And I think you will be sharing a presentation, sir.
No, I don't have a presentation. I will just speak from my notes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Right, thank you. Firstly, let me thank the Infosec Foundation to invite me for this occasion today. Sushovan has been very persistent in, arranging this. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that earlier because of various constraints. But I'm very happy to be here today. And in many ways, it is good to reconnect to the community I was serving in 1990 to 96 when I was there, posted in West Bengal in the district as a police officer. Of course, that that avatar of mine is very different from what we have today. And I hope my experience, which is very diverse and which is pretty high level in that sense, will be of interest to the audience today. Yeah, it was a great pleasure to hear the previous speakers and their context setting for the International Privacy Day today that we are assembled here to observe. I will not say celebrate because there is not much to celebrate, but it is important to mark these milestones because this is an important area, increasingly so, and we need to start working on it soonest. Which is why I have thought thought of titling this talk as starting the 1,000-mile journey. Now, as you know, the famous quote from Lao Tzu, which says that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And what it says is, at some point, you have to start the journey, take the first step, and then you will eventually complete the 1,000-mile journey and beyond. As we know, the intrepid travelers of history have traveled from one corner of the world to the other. And they are really an inspiration for us to say, okay, nothing is impossible. We have to look at that distant goal and then look at the next step that we have to take and take that step thoughtfully. So I think the importance of cybersecurity, information security, data protection has been brought out very clearly by the previous speakers. And in any case, I'm not a technical person to talk about those points. But I think as we improve our cybersecurity practices and postures within organizations at the individual levels, in the government, we will feel more and more assured about our ability to deal with these problems in a confident manner. However, privacy is a slightly different concept, and it has been engaging the attention of people in different parts of the world, thinkers in the different parts of the world. And the previous idea about privacy, which was famously defined as the right of a person to be left alone, has now been modified in many ways. And there are various definitions of privacy. I don't want to go into those definitions. But increasingly, privacy is seen as something which is in the context of electronic systems and not so much an individual privacy or privacy of his household and so on. But the kind of digital profile a person has to have, even if the person may not want to be on the digital systems in digital platforms. But given the fact that now everything is being delivered through the digital systems, there's no option but to be on digital systems for most users. It is not possible to keep away from this. And it is not only about sharing information in a particular application or at a particular point of time. The collection of data by various systems, devices, service providers, governments is relentlessly becoming more and more frequent in terms of sampling how much data they will gather and what they will do with that data and how long that data will be stored and what implications this kind of data storage has for the data principle as defined in the Privacy Act. Now, as you know, the Western society from where these concepts have come and adopted by not only India, but many other countries, is a highly individualistic society. And the dignity of the individual, the importance of the individual, the autonomy of the individual, these have been a very cherished value of that society, and which in many ways have led to innovation in intellectual property rights, in entrepreneurship. The reward system that we see in the Western society is very oriented towards people doing breakthrough work. And it's all linked to individuality and the autonomy and the responsibility an individual acquires as soon as he or she becomes an adult. Now, in eastern part of the world, Asia in particular, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, and many other parts of the world, it is the collectivist approach which is more prominent. Society is always placed ahead of the individual, and there is a famous sukta in one of the Vedas which says that before the individual, the community, before the community, the country, and so on and so forth. So it kind of makes the individual probably a part of the community, but not an entity in his own right. Now, of course, we have adopted the Western economic system, Western democratic institutions, and it is but natural that we'll also look at privacy from the Western prism. And it has advantages and it has contradictions. I will not say disadvantages, but we have to understand privacy in our cultural context and how we have always looked at privacy. What a country like India, which is short of resources, short of living spaces, very crowded public spaces, the concept of privacy here is going to be different from what we see in other places. But when we look at privacy in the context of digital identity and digital privacy, I think we are looking at something similar that we see in Western societies. So I think willy-nilly, and the fact that eventually the world population will stabilize and we'll see similar living standards everywhere, maybe next. As you know, the incidence of poverty was consistently falling over the last several decades. Of course, in pandemic, it has risen a little. But the fact remains that the world is becoming more, I think the poor also have now similar expectations of livelihood, of standard of living, of the dignity of labor and the dignity of existence that everyone else expects, which is where privacy for everybody becomes a important thing to look at. So in India, we have seen this movement, groundswell of respecting privacy for a long time. I used to work in NASSCOM, which is India's IT Association, from 2005 to 2008. When I was posted in the West Bengal cadre of the IPS, I had gone on deputation to NASSCOM. And privacy was one of the topics we were trying to get some thought process going. Of course, in those days, NASSCOM being an IT association, IT industry association, it was in the context of outsourcing of data and what data was coming from other countries to be processed here, and how privacy of that data in that country, which becomes a cybersecurity problem to be solved here in terms of controls, visibility, incident response. That was the primary concern. And so we did a seminar in 2007, I remember, when the CEO of NSDL, Mr. Bhave, also came, and he became later chairman SEBI. And various thought leaders were there, and there was a discussion around how to promote privacy and so on. I used to run a mailing list on privacy also for a long time, which kind of fell into disuse because the interest those days was not as strong as it is today. I think the big event which happened in the space of privacy globally was the Snowden Revelations, which told people how their data was not only being aggregated by commercial entities, and as Mr. Das said in the beginning, surrendering your data for getting free search results was something which everybody had reconciled to. And then the kind of data collection platforms like Facebook, in particular, were doing for providing you the free service of being able to connect to your friends and co-alumni and family and so on, was very much there. But the amount of data interception and data gathering and data analysis that governments do, especially governments in the developed world, and for their own, obviously, justifications, etc., was first time became known to everybody when Snowden came out with the revelations. And it was a shock to everyone that not only is it so easy to collect data, it is being done, and it is being done on a very large scale. And the kind of insights people can draw from that was something which was a revelation to everyone. I think that triggered the dialogue on privacy. Of course, the European Union always had this focus on, thanks to the Second World War and the kind of surveillance and the kind of traumatic divisions in society that they saw. They had special emphasis on privacy, and even before GDPR came about, there was already regulation which protected a user, his data, defined user rights as a data principle or data, whose data was being processed, the obligations of the data controllers or data processors or data fiduciaries, as we would call them in India. And then how the data was to be protected, how the consent was to be gathered, how the consent had to have purpose limitation so that it could not be used for other purposes than just for which it was collected, and so on. I think that is a phenomenal body of work, and we didn't necessarily draw on it when we look at our law being enacted. Of course, all this heavy lifting work was done by the committee under Justice Sri Krishna, which did a phenomenal job of examining all this existing body of work, looking at Indian scenario, and then proposing something which would be appropriate for Indian conditions and situation. Of course, unfortunately, that draft has undergone a lot of changes, and most privacy advocates believe that the changes are not in the interest of the data principle or the citizens whose data was supposed to have been the focus of this law. In fact, the latest version of this law is now no longer a Personal Data Protection Act, but Data Protection Act. And it looks at making data available as a new oil, as it is called, to various entities, some of those with due safeguards, some of those with very little oversight. Now, that's a very disturbing change, and I don't know whether that same version will pass muster in the parliament, but we have to wait and watch. But so that bill has been introduced in the Rajya Sabha, and we will see how it kind of plays out. And my hunch is that the bill, since it has been examined by a joint committee of the parliament, which was a multi-party composition, we may not see much change in that, and we will be gifted with whatever structures and processes and various objectives have been outlined in the law. Once it becomes the law of the land, then of course it is something which everybody will have to follow. And many people feel that a bad law is better than no law. And I also subscribe to that school of thought, because till it is free for all, when now currently we see absolutely no data rights, this law will create those data rights, and how effective the enforcement mechanism will be is something which is a matter of design and then execution and then operation. But it is important to start the journey, and which is why I thought the quote from Lao Tzu was very appropriate. Let us start the journey, and then we all have to pitch in as stakeholders to make the journey safe and in the right direction. So what all is required for the journey? So of course, as I said, the law is required for the journey, but mere law is not going to be adequate, because the law just says, okay, defines the rights, and it talks of the data protection authority and so on. Unfortunately, one of the changes which has come in is the process of selection of the members of the data protection authority. Earlier, there was a certain approach to it. Now it has become more executive oriented. We have seen in the past, and I am talking as an ex-civil servant myself, we have seen in the past that many of such bodies get staffed and stashed with former civil servants. Now, civil servants are very bright people, as we know, at the cost of praising my own community. But the challenge in data protection authority is that we must have people of not only integrity, but also knowledgeable, and also combining knowledge with passion about this particular aspect of how the society is changing and what needs to be done to make it develop trust into digital systems, and then what are the ways of going about it. It's not an easy combination to find, and we hope that we will see a good balance of how this data protection authority is constituted. But the data protection authority also will need to have a lot of clarity about the aspects of how it is structured. Of course, structure is defined, but how they will run programs on improving privacy in India. Now, I was looking at the website of Information Commissioner, which has been tasked with various laws in UK. Interestingly, the equivalent of the Right to Information Act in India is something the the Information Commissioner in UK operates. And I had the good luck of visiting the Information Commissioner's office in 2007 when I was in NASSCOM. And it was a very interesting experience. It is not in London, but 3 hours by train elsewhere. And they had a modest office at that point of time. But by now they have, I think, 300 member team. They get fees for data processing, data processors from various categories of data processors, starting with £40 for the smallest entity with a certain degree of size and revenue. Then going into, I think, £60 for the next category, and then more for the larger entities. I think this kind of approach, where there is a stake for data processors in how the information, the data protection authority works, is a very good design, because it creates interest into the working of the data protection authority. And then with the interest comes, and paying of fees comes, interest and questioning of the data protection authorities performance, so that the data protection authority performs as expected in a democracy. So I think, and it also makes it independent of the executive, because we have seen many times executive part of the government doesn't allocate adequate resources to such quasi-judicial authorities, with the result that the such bodies are not able to perform their designated function, and then people are questioning them, but they're not questioning people who are supposed to give them the resources. So to avoid that kind of a scenario, we have this great example in India of regulators like RBI and SEBI, who derive their funding from their own designated regulated entities whom they oversee, and that gives them the autonomy to devise their own programs. Of course, the excess money collected is always taken by the government. In RBI also, RBI gives I think 50,000-60,000 crore rupees every year to the government as a dividend, or whatever they call it, seigniorage, and likewise SEBI, etc. But it is important to have this kind of financial autonomy when the data protection authority is designed. Now, when you look at the creating the objective of privacy culture, which is ultimately what we want, that and it's very funny that with the right culture you can do the same things, you can achieve the same objectives with much less investment. You don't have to do very rigorous or very cost intensive kind of measures, but the culture of privacy, culture of security takes care of many of the incidents which could have happened had the culture not been there. So as Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that is the end goal that I think all regulators need to aim for, that they should create a culture of privacy, not only among their regulated entities, which is the data processors or data fiduciaries, but also among the data principals. So if I understand my privacy and I'm making informed choices, and I'm being diligent and curious about why my data is being collected for giving me services, how long it will be used, how it will be purged once the service is discontinued. All these questions have to be asked by the data principals themselves. And to create that kind of culture, of course, I'm saying data protection authority because that is the focal point of where such responsibility will lie. But it will also lie on data processors, because they are in the business of providing services, and it is in their interest to reduce their cost of compliance, which will happen if data security, data protection, privacy culture is developed very well. Now, I always say that every problem is amenable to a tripartite kind of a solution, which goes into people, process, and technologies. So the first and foremost is people. And when we talk of people here, we talk of the regulators themselves, people of integrity, people of capability, people of vision, and people of execution skills. But we also talk of people who will be data protection officers in enterprises, who are going to become the data controllers and data fiduciaries. And these data protection or privacy professionals have to do their job well. They have to understand their job well. And unfortunately, we have not been able to make a head start on this particular area. I used to be the CEO of Data Security Council of India, which incidentally, when I was in NASSCOM, I was working on setting it up so we set it up as a not-for-profit company. And there was a lot of debate about how it should be named. So we actually thought that we should call it the Data Protection and Privacy Authority of India or something like that. But it was found to be a mouthful, and then we settled for something called DSCI, which then became an acronym which I think is now fairly well recognized. But DSCI has been running programs for privacy awareness as well as privacy implementation. So they have a program on privacy lead assessor, 3-day program, classroom training program. And when I was in DSCI, we were trying to run this program, market this program. And there was such little interest in companies who would tell us that, yes, we know it is the right thing to do, but we'll do it next year or when the law comes around. Now, as you know, most enterprises are in the QSQT mode, quarter se quarter tak, so that they focus only on short-term goals. But I think good enterprises, good companies invest into long-term capabilities, foresee problems which will arrive on the horizon, and then be prepared when they are closer. And this is the kind of foresight we should see. I'm sure things have probably improved after I left DSCI in 2016. But the supply of privacy professional needs to ramp up very rapidly because there is a 2-year or 1.5-year window for implementation of the framework, which is a good time for people to put this in place. Those of you who are interested in privacy, are in cybersecurity area and would like to move to privacy, please take a look at what you need to do to build your skill sets, get those certifications from DSCI or elsewhere. There is IAPP, International Association of Privacy Professionals, which is there, and you can get a lot of fillip out of getting those certifications, and hopefully you'll be able to leverage those to move into very interesting and better paying jobs as privacy movement becomes stronger and privacy compliances become more rigorous. So, so this is the people part, but process and technology. I think process-wise, I would look at the framework of privacy by design. If you read the report by Justice Sri Krishna, it talks of privacy by design, and it's an engineering concept, an engineering framework which has 7 different aspects to it. Briefly, to tell what is privacy by design, it is number 1 principle is it should be proactive and not reactive. It is preventative and not remedial. So, as we know, in COVID, we have learned the value of prevention, and the same approach needs to be taken into privacy culture establishment. So privacy by design looks at this as the approach that privacy has to be seen as a proactive area. It has to see privacy as default. So a privacy data principle, or a citizen whose data is being collected doesn't have to ask for privacy. It will be given to the citizen by default, and that is the expectation from the service providers and the system designers. Privacy has to be embedded in design. It can't be brought in later when things have settled down. It has to be done in a very proactive and very early in the life cycle of development of systems. And here I would like to mention that, as we see the entrepreneurial energy in fintech, a lot of this fintech stuff is happening on the cloud, necessarily because cloud enables fintechs and new systems to be established, scaled up very rapidly. Clouds also offer a lot of privacy controls, and it is a very good combination of not only infrastructure, not only security, but also privacy by design. And that is something which all entrepreneurs can leverage. It also looks at positive sum and not zero sum, so that it is not a trade-off that you have privacy, but you don't have functionality or don't have security, etc. Privacy is definitely something which is a positive for the ecosystem. Then it looks at end-to-end life cycle protection. So from the time the data is asked for, consent is gathered, and till the data is used and purged at some point of time, it has to look at the end-to-end life cycle and not at a point in time kind of approach. It needs to provide visibility and transparency to data principals. They have a right to ensure that their data is accurate, is up to date, and they have a right to be forgotten, in that sense that they can ask for their data to be destroyed if they are not comfortable with keeping that data alive, subject to, of course, the other laws and regulations about data retention, etc. But this is something which is important to ensure in privacy by design. And the last principle is respect for user privacy. So I think if the designers are cognizant of this particular value of respecting user privacy and don't take them for granted, it is something which will help everybody. Now in India, as we know, we have a very diverse country. There are people of various educational backgrounds, digital facility with digital systems, and people who are just joining the digital system because they have no other way, or they're getting subsidy. They are using digital banking because the banks cannot provide them with doorstep banking or branch banking because it's too expensive. So we have to look at all these user categories and ensure that the privacy by design is implemented for all of them. There has to be language localization. There has to be awareness programs which are designed for a very low technology awareness kind of a background of people. And that is something which I think is important to see. Apart from this, I think we need to have a vision, we need to have aspirations, we need to have ambition to ensure that data privacy, data protection is implemented, and we catch up with some of the developed societies when it comes to data protection and the rights of the individuals. I would definitely want the focus to remain on the individual rights and not become data as oil, which is a good thing for the fintech industry or the entrepreneurs, but I'm sure that can be achieved without compromising the user privacy or the individual rights of the data subjects. So I thought I will end on that. And since I talked about starting the 1,000-mile journey, I also will end on using a Chinese saying, which says that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is today. So I think we have to take that kind of approach and ensure that we take up this new challenge, and we build trust in digital India, and we respect rights of each individual, and we migrate to a next state of our democracy, which is productive and respectful of individuals and entrepreneurial without without compromise on our democratic values. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm here for next some time, so I would be happy to answer any questions, but thank you for this opportunity. Great talking to you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mr. Saravade. The session was quite enriching one.